Chapter 11. Holly was too frightened and miserable in the days and weeks that followed the catastrophic pelota game to ask why she had been the target of the fiery orb. It appeared to her, from all that followed, that the event was somehow her fault, and she assumed the guilt without ever questioning whether it truly belonged to her. As for Nicholas and Viviana, they resolved to tell her of Heracon and his scheme to free himself from the prison of Odal. She must know, they would agree. It's too dangerous to let her remain in ignorance. But time and again, they would approach the moment and fail. They could not bring themselves to say the words, "You have been cursed." Far, far below us there lives a gray-skinned warlock who will perpetrate any evil to attain your heart, who will destroy all if he succeeds, who is waiting for you. Instead, they would lovingly kiss Holly goodnight and smooth her hair, wishing her a long and restful sleep as they closed the door. And Holly, watching the moonlight glint on the silver leaves above her head, would pull her rose-petal blanket up to her chin and whisper her prayers, which always ended with a plea to the elders to spare her from bad dreams. Most nights her plea was answered, and she sank into a down, soft sleep. But sometimes the elders seemed not to hear her, and, as she slept, a nightmare crept on spidery feet to fill her mind. In it, she was tall, much taller than she truly was, and all around her were children. They were small and helpless, and she was taking care of them. They rolled to and fro on the grass while she watched and laughed along with them. All the while, in the back of her mind, there was a pressing doubt, a fear that she couldn't quite locate. Then she saw that the gentle lawn where the children were playing was heaving itself up in horrible grunting lurches. Violently it spewed forth a creature unlike any she had ever seen. Shrunken, yellowing, a gelatinous white syrup oozing between the wrinkles of its flesh. The beast would quiver, its head swiveling as it searched the mild scenery for its prize, and Holly would know with shuddering certainty that she herself was the thing it sought. Frantically, she would lift her legs to flee, and then her eyes would fall upon the children. She couldn't leave them, but some flash of movement had caught the beast's eye, and it turned, aware now of her presence, lifting a long yellow finger. It pointed at her and opened its mouth in a gaping black smile, its arm uncoiled, stretching sinuously out to pull her. Holly woke up, panting. Her hair was drenched with sweat. Tundra lifted his head. "Do you want me to get your mother?" he asked, his voice filled with sympathy. It took a moment for Holly to unclench her jaws. "No." "Why not?" "It makes them worried." "But why should you bear it alone?" There was a short silence. "I'm not alone. I'm with you." Tundra thought about that. "Do you want to go out on the balcony and look at the moon?" "No." "Do you want me to tell you a story?" "No." "Are you sure you don't want me to get your mother?" "Yes." Tundra, dissatisfied, continued to look across the darkness toward Holly's bed. He heard her thumping her pillow lightly and rolling over. The room was quiet. Tundra put his head thoughtfully upon his crossed paws and closed his eyes. A muffled sob sounded from the bed. Tundra got up and approached Holly. A beam of moonlight showed him that she wasn't asleep. Her head was buried in her pillow and her shoulders were shaking. Gently, he nudged her, and, in accordance with long tradition, she lifted her tear-stained face and touched her pink nose to his. "I wish I weren't immortal," she whispered. "Why?" "I'm afraid they will never stop." "The nightmares?" "Yes." "They will, Holly. They are going to stop someday. I wish I could tell you when." "I wish you could too," said Holly. She pulled his ear, which caused him to sigh with contentment. "Tundra," she asked. Can I sleep in your bed?" Tundra opened his eyes. "It's not really a bed. It's just a mat. It'll be too hard for you." "No, it won't. Bring the window seat cushion down." "All right, no kicking." Holly arranged the cushion next to the hollow that Tundra had worn in his mat, and the two friends settled down with a bit of thrashing and wiggling. "Stop that. Lie still," ordered Tundra. Holly obediently lay still. A few moments passed. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "I'm not scared anymore." "That's good. Go to sleep." 12 hours later, Tundra stood in the shadow of an ancient oak tree, looking up into its black branches with an uncharacteristic expression of pleading. "Come, Callistus, please, be a good fellow," he called toward the upper reaches of the tree. "No," replied a wrathful voice from within. "This is your king's daughter. This is your princess. Where's your loyalty?" cried Tundra, changing tactics. "I told you before, I have nothing but sympathy for Princess Holly, but I see no reason why I should end up with lead wings to keep her from having bad dreams. Everyone has bad dreams," the voice rationalized. "You won't get lead wings, you miserable, flea-bitten pigeon," Tundra growled. "You can't promise me that," the owl replied snappishly. Tundra sighed. "You're right, Callistus. I can't promise you that, but it's extremely unlikely. I spend nearly every minute with the girl, and I haven't been turned to lead yet." "Sheer luck," crowed Callistus. "You'll drive me mad, bird. All the witches say the owls alone know the spell to ward off nightmares, and yet none of you custard-hearted wretches will help us." "Go away," replied the owl, his voice muffled as he retreated farther into his nest. "No! Then go ask Euphemia. She's no custard heart," the voice suggested. "Where is she?" "Not far, about a mile up north. Oak tree, can't miss it. Sign outside her nest says EUPH. "Why?" said Tundra suspiciously. "You'll figure it out when you get there," said Callistus sweetly. Tundra turned, ignored a sound of snickering from above. A quick lope brought him to the tree he was seeking. The sign with its ragged letters did not inspire confidence, and Tundra's doubts increased upon the appearance of Euphemia. True, she was a snowy owl, resplendent in her milk-white feathers, but there was something unreliable in her tipping walk. As she edged out upon a thick branch and peered down through the thick web of leaves, Tundra very nearly begged her pardon and left. He was, however, desperate. "Yes, certainly, certainly," Euphemia assured him. "Dispelling nightmares, child's play. One of the very first spells we owls learn. Just a matter of a few words. But of course," she added hastily, "the words must be spoken in strigigormes, so I can't teach them to you." Tundra explained what he wanted, and was taken aback by Euphemia's immediate acceptance in his invitation. "Oh, the poor dear princess. Of course I'm terribly busy, but one must answer the call of duty, don't you agree? A matter of devotion to the royal family," she fluttered. "I'll just pack my bag, don't go anywhere." She hopped and flapped down to the branch toward her nest. Tundra eyed her sign. "Why does it only say EUPH on your tree?" he called. There was a longish silence. "I can't quite hear you, dear," asked Euphemia, rustling sticks loudly. "Why does your sign say EUPH?" bellowed Tundra. There was another silence. Then the owl poked her head out. "It was those dratted squirrels," she said. "They threw the sign on the ground during one of their games, and it broke. And I've simply been so busy, I haven't had time to make another. All ready now," she called blithely, surfacing from her hole with a dead mouse wrapped in a little pink kerchief. They returned to the palace just in time to greet Holly as she emerged from her schoolroom. Tundra explained his plan. It was well known that owls, with their special wisdom of the night, had power over dreams. Witches in the mortal world were famous for sending owls to deliver hair-raising nightmares to unlucky recipients. Less commonly, owls were used to dispel dreams, or send them packing, when they visited too often or caused hopeless longings. If it worked for mortals, Tundra reasoned, there was no reason why it wouldn't work in the land of the immortals. Euphemia would simply perch above Holly's bed in one of her silver trees. When, with her owlish magic, she perceived that Holly was being assailed by a nightmare, she would utter her secret incantation, and presto, the nightmare would disappear. Holly looked from Tundra to Euphemia with excitement. "You can do this?" she asked the owl breathlessly. "Certainly," said Euphemia. "My family is renowned for its incanting. Think no more of it, your highness." "How wonderful!" exclaimed Holly. "No more nightmares forever." Tundra and Holly spent the afternoon showing Euphemia the wonders of the palace. In a cloud of light snow, they scaled the highest turrets, where the owl admired the view and explored the deepest dungeons, which were actually pantries. As usual, Holly had supper in her own sitting room, surrounded by her animal friends. Alexia, who had been told to behave herself until the owl got over her natural fear of foxes, Tundra, and now Euphemia. Tundra noticed that as the night wore on, the owl became more and more silent. Alexia chattered on as usual, detailing each and every event of her day, and Holly interrupted now and then with questions, but Euphemia, who had gabbled ceaselessly during the afternoon, was now quiet. Later still, as Holly put on her nightgown, Tundra kept watch on the owl and noticed with a sinking heart that she was apparently asleep in her tree, her head sunk deeply into her feathery breast, her eyes closed. Soon enough, the room was quiet. Moonlight streamed in through the windows, painting the walls with light and black shadows. Tundra's eyes drooped. Holly slept. An unknown number of hours or minutes later, the wolf was awakened by a tiny clicking sound. Following the discipline of instinct, he made no move, but only opened one eye. As he scanned the layers of darkness, he saw the shadowy form of an owl perched on a thin window ledge, her beak caught in the latch. Helplessly, she beat her wings against the glass, but she could not free herself. Tundra watched her for a while. "Homesick?" he asked finally, his voice cold. Euphemia replied in Sugormese. "Why should I? It doesn't seem as though you're going to be helping us." "Oh!" "What?" asked Holly sleepily from her bed. "Oh, look, poor little Euphemia." Quickly she ran across the room to detach the owl's beak from the metal ring. "Does it hurt, dear? Are you all right?" she asked. Euphemia said nothing. "You should be ashamed of yourself," Tundra burst out. "I know," said the owl softly, her head sinking into her neck feathers. Holly looked from one to the other, baffled. "What are you two talking about?" she asked. "She was trying to run away," Tundra explained. Euphemia sniffed. "I had to." Holly laid a finger on the owl's head. "Why?" "I can't make your nightmares disappear," she cried suddenly. "I can't remember any of the incantations." "You never knew the incantations," stated Tundra, trying to contain his anger. "You're right," wailed Euphemia. "I never knew them. I tried and I tried. I studied for days, but I just couldn't learn them. I failed. I failed the test, and now I failed you too," she squawked. "Callistus will do a better job than I ever could anyway." "He won't come," Tundra said, shooting a worried glance at Holly. "He's afraid." "Afraid?" asked Holly. "Of what?" "Afraid that his wings will get turned to lead," mumbled Tundra. Just as he had dreaded, Holly's face crumpled. "Oh," she said softly. After a moment, she turned to Euphemia with a small smile. "You see, you're braver than Callistus, no matter how much Strigogormes he knows." Euphemia lifted her head a little way out of her chest. "Yes," she said wonderingly, "I guess I am braver than Callistus." "Callistus the custard heart," said Tundra to reinforce Euphemia. Euphemia shuffled her tail feathers. "I'll stick by you through thick and thin," she cried. "That is, if you want me to," she added shyly. "Of course we do, Euphemia," said Holly. "Stay with us." "This doesn't solve the nightmare problem, though," said Tundra. "What are we going to do about that?" "You won't have any nightmares if you never go to sleep," cried Alexia irritably from the corner. "She doesn't care. She's an owl. But I'm a fox, and I need to sleep at night. And so do you, Holly. So stop talking." The next morning, Euphemia began her new life at the palace. Soon the sight of Holly walking about with a large snowy owl perched on her shoulders was a common one, and though Tundra continued his search throughout the kingdom for a cure to Holly's nightmares, he never regretted his first attempt. In Nicholas's study, there was one book that fascinated Holly more than any other. It rested upon an intricately carved wooden pedestal, and one of Holly's earliest memories was of staring in wonder at its wooden birds and monkeys which emerged from a forest of curling vines and lush flowers. Her fingers had traced the smooth curves and ridges for hours as she imagined the secret world of the carvings, how the animals would leap off the pedestal in the dark of night and swing themselves about on her father's bookshelves, skittering and scrambling in the monstrous overside world of people. As Holly grew, she graduated from staring intently at the pedestal to staring intently at the book itself. It was a curious object, bearing the marks of many centuries of honor. Its covers were metal, a dully glowing ancient metal, laid over with jewels. This book had never truly had an owner, but each of its caretakers had shown his or her reverence by adding an ornament to the binding, until the book shimmered with smooth rubies and emeralds, roughly cut sapphires and moonstones, finely faceted diamonds, and, in the center of the cover, an enormous black opal. Nicholas, in whose hands the volume had rested for more than 1,000 years, had called upon the finest painters of forever to add a secret to the book. It was a painting on the edges of its pages, only visible when the closed book was tilted slightly into the light. Holly, for many years forbidden to touch the volume, had squinted earnestly at the rims of the pages for months before the picture was revealed by a stray sunbeam. It was a portrait of the land of the immortals, circled by jewel-colored glaciers in the fading light of a winter sunset. In the picture, snow was falling, and somehow each tiny snowflake glimmered as though it had caught the last rosy glow of the day. There, in the center of the landscape, wound the Viridian River, green as a snake, and upon the great prospect a ring of magic trees stood, their bare branches climbing to the sky. One summer evening, when Holly was 12 years old, she came wandering into her father's study, accompanied as usual by a flurry of snow. Nicholas, who was reading at his desk, quickly closed the window, shutting out the soft twilight air before his daughter could long for it. Without a word, Holly flung herself down on the green velvet sofa and buried her face in the cushions. Nicholas said nothing, but he observed his daughter's feet kicking aimlessly, bam, 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 against the arm of the sofa, and concluded that she was bored. As if in response to his thought, Holly groaned, "I'm bored." She propped her chin against the pillow and sighed. "There's nothing to do." "There's plenty to do. You could read, you could work on that doll I saw you making yesterday. You could write a letter to Mother Selting, who hasn't been feeling entirely well this week. You could study your Latin. You could organize my correspondence. You could practice the song that Miss Milibran gave you last week. Any number of things to do." As an answer, Holly dropped her head off the side of the sofa and looked at her father upside down. "I wonder if the mortal children ever get bored," she mused. "I bet they don't." "Of course they do. All children get bored. They don't look bored when I see them in my telescope." Said Nicholas, turning back to his book. The only sound was the rhythmic pounding of Holly's feet. "Papa, can I look at the book?" "What, this book? I'm reading it." "Not that one. The one up there," she pointed with her chin. "The Book of Forever." Nicholas had known that this moment would come. He had been steeling himself for it for years, but even so, he could hardly keep from bellowing, "No, no, you may not." Instead, exerting all his self-control, Nicholas said nothing for a moment, then looked into his daughter's wide green eyes and said, "Yes, my dear, yes, you may. I think you will find a cure for boredom in its pages." Feeling suddenly adult and responsible, Holly checked to make sure her hands were clean. Nicholas, watching, smiled indulgently. "Don't worry, your hands cannot dirty this book." "Still," Holly said. But she walked over to the wooden stand. She pulled a nearby stool to her aid, climbed upon it, and ever so gently lifted the front cover of the book. "The Book of Forever," she read, "being the immortal deeds of the inhabitants of our land from the beginning of time." She slowly turned the thick, creamy paper. On the first page, a monumental P, entwined with flowers and flames, began the book. Prometheus. Then Deucalion. And there was Gaia, and there the Muses. Holly began to read, slowly at first, then with growing speed. Each of the immortals of the universe was recorded in its pages, together with the deeds that had endowed him or her with eternal life. Magical creatures and gods who had been immortal for all time were included in the catalog, with an account of their accomplishments and gifts to humankind. Each of the thousands of pages was illuminated with a portrait of the subject, and Holly was astonished when she encountered Thucydides, whom she had once seen drinking mead at a cafe, to realize how lifelike and vigorous the portraits were. "How did they—" she began, and fell silent. for she had stumbled upon Nicholas's page. There he was, his kind, powerful eyes and luxuriant brown beard. Her eyes skipped over to his biography, and she learned with growing amazement of his life centuries before in the bustling little town of Myra, and of the children he had helped there. A few pages farther on, she found Viviana's picture, looking as though she was suppressing a laugh, and read of her mother's work in Cappadocia. Selflessness, generosity, kindness in the face of evil, faith, charity, justice, strength, bravery, modesty, serenity, devotion, and above all, love. Holly read on and on of those who had used these gifts in the service of others, and the stories entered her heart. There was Galen, trying to bring order to the chaos of superstition that was medicine. And here was Merlin, who had done his best for Arthur, though he knew full well that it was out of his hands. Erasmus, the great reconciliator, rubbed elbows with Erasmus Darwin, who reconciled little. Holly's eyes rested on Mozart's tired face and the exuberant box, all of them. And look, Tintoretto, wild-eyed, Mother Selting and her protégée Finta, who had saved countless innocents from the inquisitors before dying in prison themselves. Holly giggled to read of Mrs. Nichols, who always appeared rather dull as she walked meekly through the village, and her mouth dropped open as she learned the exploits of Miss Malibran, who seemed so strict during music lessons. On and on she read, oblivious to the time, oblivious to her arms and legs shaking with weariness, oblivious to Nicholas's searching glances in her direction. Holly lifted her head and then turned to face her father. He knew what she was thinking. Bending over the book, she began to turn pages faster and faster, her long fingers stumbling against the thick paper. And there it was. She looked as though she had been painted yesterday. Indeed, the dress was the one she had worn the day before. Holly looked closely at the curling smile and green eyes. She studied her own reddish golden hair as if she had never seen it before. Almost unwillingly, she moved her eyes to the accompanying page. Holly Claus read the elaborate letters at the top. The rest of the page was blank.